Welcome back to the deep dive. I've been really looking forward to this one because today we are talking about the invisible fuel that, well, that runs our lives,
Yeah.
energy.
Mm.
But we aren't talking about, fossil fuels or solar panels. We're talking about your personal internal power source.
And that is a perfect framing for it.
Yeah.
We're grounding this whole discussion in one of the most, I think, relatable concepts in psychology, the personality spectrum.
Right.
But we're looking at it not just through behavior, but more through biology and energy flow we're trying to answer. What truly makes you feel invigorated, stable and ready to face the world?
We've all had those days. I mean, you walk into a room and suddenly you feel unstoppable, like the life force is just flowing back into you.
Yeah.
Or, and this is probably more common for some, you hit a wall. That moment when one more social interaction just feels heavy, demanding, and all you want to do is find the nearest quiet corner and, I don't know, put a do not disturb sign on your forehead.
Our deep dive today is built on sources that are really dedicated to clarifying that distinction between introverts and extroverts. It's about moving us past all the stereotypes and into the mechanical reality of how we gain and expend our resources.
Okay.
And the central metaphor that's going to guide all of this analysis is the social battery.
The social battery. I love that. So that's the mission. We're taking this simple idea of personality and turning it into like an engineering problem.
Exactly.
How is your energy system wired? How does it charge? How quickly does it drain? And I'm here representing, I guess, the loves a crowd, needs constant input side of the spectrum, which means I find this whole discussion honestly highly counterintuitive.
And I'm representing the other side, viewing this through the lens of someone who naturally requires a bit of distance, a bit of quiet to maintain equilibrium. And this conversational debate format is essential because, as the source material really stresses, the difference between these two types isn't a choice. It's a fundamental difference in energy flow and psychological wiring.
Okay, let's unpack that crucial distinction then. Because if we get the definition wrong, the whole battery metaphor just falls apart. So we have to start here. Section 1. The core definition. I want to aggressively challenge the most common misconception I hear constantly.
Please do.
Introversion is not shyness. It feels like every single time someone says, "Oh, I'm an introvert," someone else automatically replies, "Oh, you just need to get out more."
That is precisely the myth our sources urge us to dispel right away. The confusion is rampant because the two often look similar from the outside.
Right.
But shyness is a behavioral state. It's
Yeah.
often rooted in fear or anxiety or discomfort about being judged in social settings. It's an emotion, a feeling you experience.
Okay.
Introversion, however, is a psychological preference that dictates how you gain and expend energy. That's the core of it.
See, I know these high-functioning, incredibly successful people who call themselves introverts. They lead huge teams. They give these powerful presentations. They're definitely not afraid of people. But they look genuinely pained when they have to attend, say, the office holiday party. So if they aren't shy, what is the barrier? What's going on there?
The barrier is stimulation management, not fear. Confidence and competence like public speaking, those are learned skills. Anyone can learn them.
Okay.
Introversion is an innate preference for a certain level of stimulation. The sources we looked at indicate that an introvert can perform brilliantly on stage. They're not afraid of the spotlight. But the sheer intensity of the external interaction, processing the audience's thousands of reactions, managing the flow of the moment, the requirement to be intensely on it, demands a massive energy expenditure.
So just because they nailed the presentation, it doesn't mean they enjoy the energy cost of it. It sounds like they invested heavily, and now they have to pay that debt back.
Exactly. They may have delivered a stellar speech, but their internal processing center is now, you could say, running hot.
Right.
They will inevitably need intense recovery time, which we call alone time, to replenish those spent resources. It's about the sheer quantity and intensity of the external data they have to process, not the quality of the interaction itself.
Let's talk about the outward signs then. We need some key terminology to move past these generalizations. When I look at myself, my default mode is seeking external stimulation. I am naturally drawn to being outgoing. If I'm bored, I don't reflect. I seek friction. I look for the next thing to engage with, the next conversation, the next new place.
And that is the defining trait of the extrovert, that outward orientation. Your energy is fueled by the world outside of you.
Yeah.
For the introvert, the counter definition isn't simply not outgoing. The focus shifts entirely to the internal landscape. Introverts are defined by their reliance on internal processing, deep thoughtfulness, and observation. Their default setting when they're not actively engaged is to synthesize the input they already have rather than frantically searching for new input.
So if an extrovert is an explorer, constantly seeking new territory, the introvert is more like a cartographer, analyzing the maps of the territory they've already covered.
That's a very apt analogy. Now, to truly understand this core definition, we have to look at the source of stimulation. It gets a little technical, but it's key to understanding the social battery.
Okay.
This is where the actual physiological split happens, according to the research we analyzed.
Bring on the neuroscience. Why do I feel restless if it's too quiet? And why do you find that same quietness rejuvenating?
Well, it comes down to optimal levels of arousal and the regulation of dopamine.
Dopamine. Okay.
Extroverts and introverts respond to dopamine. It's a neurotransmitter linked to reward and motivation. They respond to it differently, particularly in the brain pathways that process stimulation.
Okay, let's be specific here. What does the source material say about the extrovert's dopamine pathway? How does that work for me?
So extroverts primarily use the dopamine pathway that's associated with seeking and reward. Sources suggest that extroverts have a lower baseline level of internal arousal.
Lower. So I'm running on low power by default.
You could think of it that way. It means your brain requires a high level of external stimulation, social interaction, noise, novelty, fast-paced action to reach that optimal, comfortable, and motivated state. You're seeking stimulation out there to feel centered.
Right.
If it's too quiet or too low-key, your brain interprets that as understimulation, and that's what causes the restlessness, the anxiety, or the boredom.
That explains so much. I mean, if I sit in silence for 20 minutes, I don't feel rested. I feel antsy. My internal dialogue becomes, like, oppressive because there's nothing external to distract or engage it. I'm looking for friction, for movement, for a conversational sparring partner.
Now, contrast this with the introvert. The sources suggest that introverts typically have a higher baseline level of internal arousal. They are often already operating at an optimal level of cognitive activity, just dealing with their own thoughts and their internal landscape.
So they're already running at full power, just by themselves.
In a sense, yes. Therefore, they aren't seeking external stimulation. They're trying to manage and protect their existing optimal state.
So for the introvert, all that external input, the crowded cafe, the loud meeting, the overlapping conversations, it isn't a welcome boost. It's an immediate sensory overload.
It acts as an intrusion. For the introvert, energy is generated and replenished by focusing on the internal world. Deep reading, sustained concentration, reflection, or working on complex, solitary projects. Too much external stimulation doesn't charge them. It overwhelms their already busy system, rapidly draining resources that were meant for internal thought.
I can illustrate this perfectly. If I'm feeling flat, I will find the loudest, busiest cafe in town, put in my earbuds, and just absorb the buzz of the crowd when I'm working. The noise and the activity is the backdrop that makes me feel productive. What would that same situation feel like for you?
It would feel like trying to run an incredibly complex piece of software on an outdated computer. Everything just slows down. The noise and the activity become competing inputs that I am forced to process, even subconsciously. I would likely leave that cafe feeling more exhausted than when I arrived because I spent massive cognitive resources just filtering out the environment so I could focus on my work.
That distinction seeking optimal stimulation versus protecting optimal stimulation, that seems to be the fundamental difference between these two energy systems.
It is.
It's not about how much we like people. It's about how our central nervous systems react to noise.
Exactly. And this natural tendency to be drawn outward to experience or inward to analyze and process, that's the key reflection we'd encourage you listening to make. And once you understand that foundational difference, the concept of the social battery makes perfect sense. So let's formally introduce the social battery metaphor as our guiding principle. It's a really elegant way to conceptualize this energy management. We all have this battery, but the mechanism for charging and the rate of draining are fundamentally opposed for introverts and extroverts.
And as the resident extrovert, I often feel like my battery is powered by, I don't know, a kinetic energy system. The more I move, the more I talk, the more people I see, the more charge I build up. I'm literally generating energy through interaction.
And that is the core difference. For the introvert, as the sources clearly define, social interaction is a steady, constant drain on the battery's charge.
A drain?
Every greeting, every nuanced facial expression you have to decode, every response you formulate, it all takes a small toll on the reserve. For the extrovert, social interaction is often the charging cable.
Yes.
The very activity that depletes one type is the source of replenishment for the other.
Let's fully explore that extrovert dynamic. Gaining energy from crowds. Give me the detailed breakdown of what is happening psychologically when I walk into a packed room and feel that surge of energy. It's more than just being happy to see my friends, right?
Oh, it's much more. When you enter that high stimulation environment, a crowd, a concert, a busy team meeting, you are instantly flooding your brain with the precise level of external activity it needs to hit its optimal arousal level. Okay.
The noise, the lights, the variety, the sheer momentum of collective human energy. These are all external inputs that satisfy your brain's craving for that dopamine-fueled reward-seeking we talked about.
It feels like the noise cancels out the static in my head. It allows me to finally focus on what I want to achieve. The stimulation actually sharpens my attention rather than diffusing it.
That phenomenon is crucial. The high energy of the crowd doesn't just distract you, it acts as a catalyst for your own cognitive function. We see this often in real-world scenarios. The extrovert who starts the party feeling maybe just adequate.
Yeah, just okay.
But by the 2-hour mark, when most people are starting to flag, they are feeling invincible. They feel capable of organizing 3 more events or solving complex problems or taking on new risks. This feeling is literally a high-level energy boost derived entirely from that social stimulation.
I've totally felt that. I might have struggled to write an email earlier in the day, but after an intense 3-hour meeting, suddenly I can power through my entire to-do list in 30 minutes. The momentum is it's addictive. It creates a positive feedback loop. Stimulation leads to energy, which leads you to seek more stimulation. This is why when an extrovert has a conflict or a problem, their instinct is often to immediately get a group together to talk it out.
Yes?
The discussion itself is what charges their solution-finding ability.
Okay, now let's reverse the polarity. Walk us through the inverse experience, which is the introverse reality. Losing energy from crowds.
Yeah.
I genuinely want to understand the physical sensation of the drain, not just the emotional desire to leave.
The drain is a tangible, often heavy feeling of cognitive fatigue. It's not sadness or social aversion. When the introvert is in a crowded, high-stimulation environment, their brain is constantly forced into a high-level processing mode.
Right.
They are monitoring multiple conversations, filtering background noise, observing body language, and carefully selecting their moments to speak all at the same time.
Wow, that sounds exhausting just to describe.
It is. The sources we looked at suggest the frontal lobes, which handle executive function, are heavily taxed during these periods. This rapid, complex management of overwhelming external data rapidly depletes vital resources, maybe even glucose stores in the brain.
So it's a physical thing.
Absolutely. The drain manifests not just as mental fog, but as irritability, difficulty forming coherent sentences, and even physical tension.
So you might be enjoying the conversation, you might find the people delightful, but your body is sending emergency signals that the central processor is overheating.
Precisely. You reach a point of saturation where the input becomes overwhelming noise rather than useful information. It's like trying to drink from a fire hose.
Yeah.
You're forced to shut down non-essential functions just to conserve the remaining charge. That's why you'll see introverts physically leaning against a wall or retreating to the kitchen to stare out the window. They are desperately trying to filter the environment.
And if they don't get that filtering time, what happens?
They hit empty. The key vocabulary here is defining the recharge process. For an extrovert, a recharge might be a quick, intense interaction or a new experience. For the introvert, recharging means completely stepping away from the stimulating environment.
A total break.
It requires removing the external input to allow the internal system to calm down, synthesize everything, and reset the cognitive reserves.
It sounds like a forced system reboot on a computer.
It's essential maintenance, and this brings us to the critical role of alone time. We have to emphasize that this is not merely a preference or a hobby or even a luxury. For a pure introvert, alone time is the essential, non-negotiable requirement for their system maintenance. They cannot function sustainably without it.
Let's get into the professional implications of that. If an introvert skips their necessary alone time or that recharge period, what's the immediate real-world consequence in the workplace?
Well, the consequences cascade across all areas of function. First, cognitive speed just plummets, decision-making becomes sluggish, and high-level analytical tasks become nearly impossible because the brain's resources are depleted. Okay?
They also become prone to extreme irritability and stress, which leads to relationship friction. If you force an introvert to endure 2 weeks of packed social and professional events with zero recovery time, you risk true exhaustion, which can potentially impact their physical health, their sleep quality, their immune function.
So an introvert who is forced into a constant extroverted schedule like a sales job with back-to-back client dinners every single night is literally running on borrowed time until they burn out entirely.
They are operating with a dangerously sluggish CPU, making errors and generating stress hormones. Whereas the extrovert in that same high-contact sales role is thriving.
Right, they're loving it.
They're getting more efficient and feeling energized by the very activity that is destroying the introvert. This understanding is so key for organizational management.
I think many extroverts, and I absolutely plead guilty here, we often misunderstand this. We see a friend or a colleague stepping away from a high-energy situation, and our instinct is to draw them back in. We think, oh, we'll cheer them up. The fun just started.
We don't realize that in doing so, we might be actively accelerating their system failure.
And that shifts the entire dynamic from a matter of social inclusion to a matter of fundamental biological resource management. The quiet colleague isn't being antisocial. They are responsibly monitoring their fuel gauge. Understanding the social battery allows us to move past judgment and into respect for these different energy capacities.
That clarity is so vital. Okay, now that we understand the mechanics of the charge and the drain, let's apply this to the arena where these two energy systems most frequently clash. The art, or maybe the burden, of small talk. I am prepared to enthusiastically defend small talk. I love it. It is a necessary social lubricant, it's a mechanism for connection, and it's a perfect example of low-effort, high-return charging for the extrovert. It's the warm-up before the sprint.
And this is where the conflict becomes most apparent. For the extrovert, small talk is a low-stakes exercise. For many introverts, it feels less like an appetizer and more like an unwelcome tax on their highly valuable cognitive resources.
But why? From my perspective, small talk chatting about the weather, the weekend, the terrible commute, it's a perfect way to break the ice. It lets me test the waters, gauge your mood, and immediately start activating my reward systems. I get a quick, easy shot of connection and validation. It's fun, easy interaction, and it starts the charging process.
And that is the extrovert advantage. You benefit from the sheer volume of interaction, regardless of its depth. The act of connecting, even superficially, is fulfilling for you.
Yeah.
For the introvert, the difficulty lies in the perceived lack of substance.
Wait, I see the lack of substance as a benefit. It's low stakes. Why is that so
Yeah.
draining for you?
Because introverts naturally crave depth and meaningful connection. That is what provides cognitive fulfillment and justifies the energy investment. Superficial chatting requires immense scattered cognitive effort without providing the rewarding synthesis the introvert brain is looking for.
Okay, let's break down the actual cognitive difference between, say, 5 minutes of small talk and 5 minutes of deep talk. How does the introvert brain process those two things differently?
In 5 minutes of small talk, the brain is forced into a state of diffuse attention. You are constantly switching contexts, from the weather to a recent movie, back to a joke, then to planning the next weekend trip.
Right, bouncing around.
This requires constant context switching, rapid retrieval of low-priority data, and perpetual social monitoring just to ensure the conversation doesn't stall. This uses significant working memory, but engages very little of the deep analytical processing power that the introvert finds rewarding. It is cognitively inefficient.
It's like a computer rapidly opening and closing dozens of small, useless files.
Precisely. It accelerates the battery drain because you are putting in huge amounts of energy just to keep the social mechanism running without getting that dopamine hit of deep engagement.
All right.
Now, contrast that with 5 minutes of a deep, focused discussion, say, on the cosmological implications of quantum entanglement or the structure of a complex business model.
That sounds like a much heavier lift. How is that less draining?
Because it allows the brain to engage in sustained, focused attention. It directs all those internal processing resources toward one meaningful task. It activates the pathways associated with synthesis and insight. And this is highly energy efficient for the introvert. The depth of the discussion provides cognitive satisfaction, which acts as its own form of internal reward, offsetting the energy that was spent.
So an introvert would rather spend 10 minutes dissecting the philosophy of time travel than spend 2 minutes talking about the bus schedule. The superficiality is the actual drain.
It's the constant shallow context switching that creates the cognitive friction, and this puts a completely different spin on social avoidance. The introvert, who appears to be struggling with small talk, isn't being difficult. They are trying to manage their resource allocation. They're waiting, often desperately, for the conversation to become substantial enough to justify the expenditure.
This also totally affects how we navigate group settings, which brings us to these observable differences. I've noticed that in a meeting, I immediately want to jump in and start thinking out loud, sometimes interrupting, I'll admit, because the conversation itself is how I formulate my ideas.
That is the extrovert's processing style. External articulation. You are engaging to generate energy and solidify your thoughts. The introvert's natural tendency is the opposite, to observe first.
No.
They will stand back, listen intently, absorb the dynamics of the room, analyze the hierarchies, and process the substance of every point being made. They're essentially mapping the social and intellectual territory before they invest their energy in speaking.
So if I see someone standing against the wall, quietly watching the party, they aren't necessarily waiting for an invitation to join in. They are fully participating through absorption.
Absolutely. They're using their energy for deep observation and understanding rather than for external projection. They are conserving their limited communication resources until they can formulate a response that they feel adds significant, worthwhile value. So when the introvert finally does speak, their contribution is often very concise, impactful, and clearly formulated, precisely because they invested all that time processing internally first.
That makes me realize how much energy I waste on superfluous comments just because I'm trying to keep the momentum going. If the extrovert is the engine constantly driving the volume forward, the introvert is the complex filtering system, ensuring the output is meaningful.
Exactly. And understanding these different modes of participation is critical for navigating social and professional environments effectively. If you assume silence means apathy, you miss the wealth of insight being gathered by the observer.
This analysis provides the perfect bridge to addressing the most damaging assumption of all, the perceived rudeness of the introvert.
We must address this head on. The essential distinction is that introverts are not rude. They are managing energy and resources responsibly. This is the crucial leap of understanding we need for mutual respect.
Because in our culturally extrovert-dominant world, especially in corporate or social settings, silence or retreat is almost automatically misinterpreted as disinterest or a lack of motivation or even a personal snub.
Yes.
If I invite you to dinner after a long work week and you politely decline, my default reaction is still often, oh, did I say something wrong?
And that external interpretation is exactly what we need to reframe. The internal reality is that an introvert who is quiet or who declines an invitation is making a highly responsible, self-aware decision about their energy resources.
Look,
They might have hit their social quota for the month, or they know they have a cognitively demanding task the next day that requires a fresh battery. Declining is often an act of self-care and respect for their own internal limits. It's not a rejection of the friendship.
so if my introverted friend says, I love you, but I need to stay home tonight and stare at the ceiling, I should take that statement literally as a non-negotiable energy requirement.
Precisely. Their quiet nature or their need for distance is a sign of deep processing or essential maintenance, not disinterest. We must encourage you, our listeners, especially those who thrive on external validation, not to take an introvert's need for distance personally. When they state their need for alone time, they are communicating a fundamental operational requirement.
It truly shifts the paradigm. It elevates the introvert from someone who is just antisocial to someone who is a sophisticated machine that monitors its fuel gauge constantly and acts preemptively to prevent burnout.
And this leads us to an important complexity raised in the sources. Are we really all neatly divided to two rigid camps? Can you be both?
I was just about to ask that. I know I have days where I absolutely crave a quiet Sunday afternoon of reading and focused work, but that craving never supersedes my need to call someone later that night. Where do those people fall?
That nuance places you squarely in the middle ground, confirming the existence of the ambivert. Our sources confirm that the majority of people do not sit at the extreme poles but cluster somewhere in the middle, displaying characteristics of both introversion and extroversion.
So what does the ambivert experience feel like on a daily basis? Is it a continuous battle or is it the best of both worlds?
It's often the best of both worlds, but with a unique set of management challenges. The ambivert experience is characterized by situational adaptability.
Okay.
They can genuinely enjoy and be energized by social interaction and crowds for a sustained period, effectively charging their battery like an extrovert. However, unlike a pure extrovert, they hit a clear saturation point. They must have regular alone time and reflection to avoid draining completely, similar to the introvert.
So they might be the life of the party for 2 hours, but then they need 2 hours of silence immediately afterward, whereas the extrovert could stay for 6 hours, and the introvert might have left after 1.
Exactly. Their charging mechanism is more flexible, more balanced, and more responsive to immediate situational demands. The key advantage the ambivert possesses is their adaptability. They can adjust their style depending on whether the situation demands high energy output or deep, sensitive listening. This often makes them excellent managers or mediators because they can understand the energy needs of both extremes.
But I imagine there's an internal cost to that constant adaptability. You're constantly switching modes, which must itself be draining.
There is absolutely a cost. The ambivert's challenge is figuring out their current needs. Since they're driven by both internal processing and external interaction, they often feel conflicted.
Yeah, I can see that.
They might book a week of intense social events, feel energized, and then crash suddenly, requiring an emergency recharge. Their flexibility is a strength, but their lack of a rigid preference means they must be constantly vigilant about their energy levels to maintain that balance.
This brings us to the core of this entire deep dive. So what does this all mean? Beyond personal knowledge, how does understanding the social battery improve our actual lives?
The primary takeaway is the application of mutual understanding and really sustainable living. Understanding the social battery helps us implement effective self-management, knowing when to say no, scheduling those necessary recharge periods, and honoring our personal optimal level of stimulation.
And it changes how we view our relationships. If your colleague needs to work remotely 2 days a week, it's not an excuse to avoid work. It's a necessary environmental adjustment to maximize their productivity.
Exactly.
If your partner retreats to a quiet room after a long day, it's energy management, not rejection.
It allows us to manage expectations and, crucially, to avoid taking silence or withdrawal personally. It gives us permission to own our needs and communicate them clearly. If you are an extrovert who finds the silence of solo work oppressive, organizing your day around collaborative tasks is a smart energy strategy. If you are an introvert who needs absolute silence to concentrate, advocating for that specific environment is necessary.
It is a framework for building sustainable relationships, both at home and professionally, that truly honors our differing energy requirements. If we respect the battery, we improve the quality of the interaction, even if there's less of it.
And that concept of quality over quantity is the final piece of the puzzle. The introvert prioritizes substance because energy is scarce. The extrovert prioritizes flow because interaction generates energy. Neither approach is morally superior. They are simply different operating systems.
Wow, what a deep dive into the mechanics and engineering of our personality types. We have transformed the way we view energy.
We've moved past that massive misconception that introversion equals shyness, firmly defining the difference by energy flow and the need for optimal arousal. We introduced and explored the central metaphor of the social battery,
All right.
detailing why social interaction is a charging cable for the extrovert, but a steady, constant drain for the introvert.
We debated the real-world friction caused by small talk, recognizing why it is a necessary warm-up for one and an inefficient cognitive burden for the other due to the lack of substance. And we championed the non-negotiable necessity of alone time for the introvert to successfully recharge and maintain high function.
And finally, we acknowledge the flexible but complex balancing act performed by the ambivert, who must constantly monitor their unique energy requirements and situational adaptability. This deep dive should arm you, our listener, with the vocabulary to have better, more honest conversations about your own capacity and your own needs.
We've established that energy is finite, so you have to spend it wisely and respect your own internal fuel gauge.
And as we close, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought that builds on this foundation. We've established that managing your energy means being selective, but consider this. Don't just ask if you are charging or draining, but question the source of that energy exchange.
Ooh.
Are you allowing people or activities to consistently overdraw from your reserves? Is the person or activity truly worth the cost you are paying to plug into your social battery?
That is a profound question. Are you using your energy efficiently? It's not just about managing resources, it's about valuing them. So we turn the question back to you, listening right now. Are you an introvert, an extrovert, or perhaps the perfectly balanced ambivert? Let us know. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. We'll catch you next time.